City, the proverb from Zanzibar.
Yes.
Malenge si mboga.
Lakini malenge ni boga. Ukipenda boga, penda na ua lake. If you love a pumpkin, also love its flower.
Yes. So, Dr. Siror, the question that City wanted to ask was on batteries. So, City, please ask the question.
You see, the beauty of technology, technology isn't static. It even goes beyond being dynamic. There are always new ways being found to ensure that what is good is better. Now, when we talk of batteries and we talk of power generation, we're talking about something that is likely to be very massive and very expensive. Now, the thing that batteries are known for, yes, they have power in smaller gadgets, but big gadgets, that power doesn't really last very long. Now, the question I wanted to ask was actually answered when we were off air, but I will ask it nonetheless. Do we have technology that can guarantee the storage of power within those batteries for much longer than we've had in the past, beyond, say, an hour? Do we have batteries, whether it is lithium, whatever it is that they now have in batteries, that can last, say, even 6 hours? Or are we still exactly where we were, where it's a stopgap? But that's all it does, it's a stopgap.
Thank you so much, Muga, for that question. You can size batteries to provide you as much power as you may want. The only issue is that it will be the more you can store, the more expensive it can be. And let me also indicate here that the battery technology has really been improving over time, to the extent that the technologies we have right now are definitely much smaller in size. They used to be very massive even in size, where to store some particular capacity, you really need a very big room. But I think with time, they have become modular, they have become smaller in size. And what you measure mainly in terms of a battery is ampere hours. That is the number of hours it can last supplying 1 amp. So it is possible to size the battery in a manner that it can supply power for as long as you want. Of course, the underside would be the cost. But the role they really play in terms of dealing with intermittent sources, Muga, would be to size them in a manner that if, for example, your plant can generate, say, 40 megawatts, it's not for you to generate 40 megawatts. You could provide for you to supply a constant at 30 megawatts. The rest, of course, is recharging the batteries. Then whenever now there is a cloud cover, it comes in, first of all, to improve on the quality, to maintain so that you are able to supply 30 megawatts constantly and almost behave like a baseload, deal with inequality challenges. And then definitely when there will be no solar, then it continues to supply. And the same can happen. Of course, wind, the beauty is it can supply both during the day and night. So it can really help to mitigate against those fluctuations that do come as a result of the wind variability and also solar variability. So it can be as big as you may want, but of course the issue, at what cost?
But then what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say, engineer, is many of these variable plants do not have this capacity.
Yeah, the ones which are currently in the country, Latifis, they don't.
But
so that means...
Wait.
Yes.
In those factories that you say that have sensitive equipment, one of the things that they'll have is they'll have a power stabilizer there, they'll have the AVS system and stabilizer to make sure that there's a stable source there's a stable power getting to feed this machine, whether it's coming from the grid of Kenya Power or it's coming from the generator outside. All right? Now, for this generator, and you know very well, I mean, the science of it is that I have a solar plant. At some point, there'll be a cloud that will come, and a passing cloud will affect my generation. Wouldn't it have been obvious that as you're installing this, you also are thinking about those moments when you have the cloud cover?
No, definitely. I think those are things that were known, Latif. But the assumption was, and indeed I think this is a global thing, that where you have intermittent sources, they should not account for a large proportion of your generation mix. So if you are able to maintain it at a very low proportion, then the rest of the grid that is generating the hydros and the base power would actually be able to even out some of those variabilities. But we are now a situation where the solar or the wind is generating a very large proportion, then it now starts becoming a major headache. And that is indeed why I was telling Du that where we are right now is not a further addition of the intermittent sources, because that worsens the situation. We need an increase of the base loads. Indeed, if it was such that we were able to increase the base loads so that the proportion that wind and solar generate on the generation mix, that particular challenge would not be felt, because it would be like you are just dropping a small thing on a very big truck that is moving. The impact would actually be not as massive as if it were like 50% of the load or 40% of it. So really that is the way to mitigate that. But going forward, yes, the new ones should come with those mechanisms of stabilizing.
Are you telling these things to the Ministry of Energy and to regulator IPRA? Are they aware of these things? Because right now the conversations that are happening, even as our president, for example, is going to Saudi Arabia and other places, and we are bragging in a panel conversation, even a moderator saying, you know what, people, Kenya has 90% plus of green and renewable energy. Everybody is thinking, so if we're going to invest in Kenya, let's put up more solar plants, let's put up more wind. Not many are even thinking at hydro and all. So our push seems to be at government level, we are going to look for more and more investors for wind and solar. And yet the company is saying, guys,
not a reliable source.
Not more wind and solar. Let's look at something else.
No, that is, it is a conversation.
Are they aware of your concerns?
Definitely, I think this is one of such platforms, but at ministry level, the ministry is very much aware. And we are very cognizant of the situation that we are in right now. But we're also cognizant of the pushes by maybe tenderers and entrepreneurs in terms of pushing some of these things, Latif, which is really a nightmare to my guys at the National Control. The more you increase these variable sources, the more you are really making their life a nightmare. And if there is a mechanism where we can ensure, and indeed we are even engaging the regulator, one of the things that we are engaging them on is what is called captive power. One of them that we are engaging them on is net metering, where, the industry and players can put solar panels on their roofs, which is a good thing. But this is the biggest challenge, Latif, and this is really what should get out there to each and every person. The moment we put solar panels on top of all our roofs, we would not have a problem if you don't interconnect it with our grid. The moment you connect it with our grid, Latif, you can imagine Nairobi if all the roofs had solar panels. And all of a sudden it starts raining. One, all the generation may be quite substantial, it will drop to zero. And not only will it drop to zero, it will now attempt to pull power from the grid that was being supplied by the solar for their own usage. So you have a double tragedy. A loss, assume, for example, all the roofs were generating 50 megawatts. Then you are losing 50 megawatts instantly, and then it attempts to pull another 50 from the grid. So the power quality in the country is really going to be impacted very adversely. And it's a conversation we want to have with the regulator, that as you allow people to just connect to our grid, please, let's discuss on the impact on power quality. Because you see, people would want to stone me when the quality of power is not as it should be. But if you are going to allow any person to just hook to my network, and of course we are in an open access era, without you providing the safeguards to ensure that they are connecting to my grid is not going to compromise the quality of my power, or if it does, then don't hold me responsible. Because if you have come and you are supporting a mechanism that is going to compromise the quality of my power, then how do you make me responsible for that quality? So it's really a conversation where we are saying, please, if you want to put those solar panels on top of your roof, but don't connect it to our grid, we don't have an issue. This is freedom. That is your space, of course, under the regulations. But if you are going to interconnect with the grid, let's have a conversation. What mechanisms will you put in place to ensure you don't compromise the quality of my power, which is, again, affecting the industry, who are looking up to me to provide quality supply?
What would you like? What kind of conversation would you like? Because, if we can put all solar panels on all these roofs, that's not a bad thing.
True.
If we can generate 50 megawatts from all these roofs, that's not a bad thing. So what would you like?
We would want a situation where if you are going to put these solar panels on top of your roof, then also have a mechanism to deal with the quality. And what we would say is that put a battery storage to ensure that you don't keep having the variability affecting my network. Put a mechanism to control that. If you are unable then to connect them to my grid, we should have a fee so that I can now set up a mechanism for dealing with the poor quality issues that emanate from the fact that you have connected to the grid. So we should have a conversation around there so that you don't just have a situation where somebody connects and we say net metering, we net off the units, and the quality that you have put on my network is so bad that now everyone is running away. And then, of course, you end up being the only one
supplier.
The only supplier. And possibly you can now sell
also
more.
the only consumer.
More of the solutions. Yes.
Yeah. With these things that we're talking about, Engineer Siror, are we looking at a situation whereby load shedding then could become a reality in the coming days or in the coming months because of what we've talked about with the low production coming from the dams that are available and obviously our heavy reliance on hydro? Is that what we're looking at?
Now, we are doing our best really to mitigate this. And possibly one of the things we are also banking on is the fact that we are now in a period where we are expecting heavy rains in parts of the country. I know it was downgraded. Initially, it was El Nino. Of course, we didn't want the El Nino fact, but we wanted the water that comes from the process.
Of course.
But, of course, with the fact that now it is still expected that there are heightened rains, or the level of rains is going to be high, we do expect then our dams to be getting more and more full. And possibly also to assure the public, there are a number of initiatives, like we did mention, we have the link to Ethiopia, where we can get some power, but of course right now it's also 100 megawatts. But these rains we also do believe is affecting the whole region. So the situation even in Ethiopia is definitely going to be better so that we can get the 200 megawatts. We also have an interconnection where we are currently working on completing. This is being done by Ketraco. That is the link to Tanzania. We also do hope, not that we expect power from Tanzania, but we do hope that with all these interlinkages, and the fact that the rain patterns in the region are not as uniform. Yes, it could be that Ethiopia is currently affected as we are, but I don't know what the issue is obtaining around the entire region. But by having interconnected grids, which is really what we are promoting, this effect is going to be mitigated in a manner. But if you look at even what the conversation that has been handled at the ministry level all the way to the cabinet, they are very much aware of the current prevailing situation.
Okay.
And we are working together towards ensuring we don't have a situation where we would stare at load shedding. And maybe another thing that I could just add do also, one of the other issues in terms of even providing power in the parts of the country is brought about by transmission constraints. It is not as easy to move power, or rather there are a lot of implications when you attempt to move power using a very long path. And there are currently some projects which are ensuring, or rather their completion would provide for shorter links to be completed. There are projects like the Tarkwel Ortum Kitale. Ortum substation is being completed. Shortly, Kitale substation is going to be completed. It will enable Tarkwel, which currently is unable to dispatch during the day by virtue of some 3 solar plants which are occupying the transmission line. We have 3 solar plants in a place near Eldoret. This is Selenkei, Sedate, and Alten. And the capacity of these solar plants is 40 megawatts each. So that means that during the day, they are meant to generate 120 megawatts. They are also not as bad. But again, like I said, intermittent sources are intermittent.
And they don't have
But again, the negative effect, Latif, on that is the fact that the capacity of the transformation, which is in Lesos, is just about that 120 megawatts. So we have a situation where if the 3 solar plants are operating, this is the same line which is meant to evacuate power from Tarkwel. So when they are operating during the day, you cannot dispatch power from Tarkwel. And Tarkwel, of course, is the best dam we have in the country in terms of the amount of water capacity and the amount it can generate per meter. So during the day, we have a situation where Tarkwel cannot dispatch. But the completion of Tarkwel Ortum Kitale line is actually going to ensure now that even during the day when these solar plants are operating, there is an alternate path where power can be evacuated from Tarkwel and it can come to Kitale, support parts of Western Kenya, also come to Eldoret.
Okay.
Another project which is also very critical, and I really want to applaud Ketraco here, is the one for Sonduoma Beawendo. The challenge, one of the most underserved areas, or the ones who face the biggest challenges in this country, are parts of Migori going towards Kisii, going all the way to almost Kuria and all those parts of the country, including Bomet. And the reason, again, is that we have a very long line that is having them. We have a line that comes from Olkaria, it goes to Kibos, 300 kilometers, come to come to, and of course, Kibos, go to Mamboleo, 7 kilometers, go to 40, a place called Moroni, go to another almost 50 to a place called Chemosit. Then you go to Sotik, go to Gegati, Awendo. Now, if you look at the entire length it has traversed, it may be upwards of 450 kilometers. And I know we have not mentioned this, but one of the factors that does affect what is called losses, Latif, is the length of the line, the voltage and the length. The higher the voltage, the lower the losses. But the longer the length. Now, on the same voltage, the longer the length, the more the losses. So we have a situation here where a place that is so near to Olkaria is being served by a line that is over 450 kilometers.
How do you mitigate this?
To mitigate it, there is a project which is where power is taken from Olkaria to a place called Narok, and I think it may be just about 60 or so kilometers. Then from Narok to a place called Bomet, where now it will be interlinked, is another possibly 70 or so kilometers. So with 110 kilometers being completed, you would actually be serving the same area with a much half the length. And this is now a project we are currently engaging even the ministry and engaging Ketraco to see if we can fast track it. Because you see, when we want to look at the timelines that are provided, for that region to wait for more than a year or even more than 1.5 years, would be a great disservice.
Indeed.
And we are really engaging the ministry to see mechanisms. It's already under discussion of how we can complete that line, possibly in under 1 year. If there is a will, definitely there is a way.
Okay.
And we are actively engaging on that to reduce that length and also enable that power to be evacuated there. Because what does happen? In that part of the country, the generation that serves at times, if you have to avoid load shedding, is called the Moroni GT. Moroni GT is owned by Kengen. It generates 60 megawatts. It is the most expensive source in the country. You know, there has been a myth, Latif, and this most
privateers, private sector.
There has been a myth where people really think that for some reason there is a lot of generation that Kengen has, and it's the cheapest. And for some reason there is a criminal in, somewhere who just decides to leave that power that is cheap and then go for very expensive power.
Sure.
That I know it has stayed for some time, but we are here to say really that is not the situation.
Okay, can we look at the high cost of power? And I'm talking about what we are paying in monthly bills and via the purchase of tokens. We've seen a significant increase in months. We've seen almost double in 12 months. So you can look at it in two ways. That what you buy for 1,000 shillings has reduced by half, or that you're spending more than double for the same number of units. That's what we are looking at now. Why is this happening? Why has this happened?
Thank you so much, Ndu. That's really another conversation that I think the more we engage, the better the public would understand. Number one, when we talk about the tariff that is being used, this is a regulated tariff. Many other times when people talk about the cost of power, they look in my direction.
Yes.
You're the one billing us.
The truth of the matter is, that would be similar, Ndu, to when we talk about the cost of fuel, we look at a petrol station. It's exactly similar. It's exactly similar. And I don't know to what extent at times when you ask that petrol attendant why the power is that costly,
the fuel
and maybe put him to task to explain why he has to pay 200 shillings per litre of fuel. It is exactly the same. This is a regulated sector. And the tariff that is being applied is regulated by IPRA. And possibly just to give a quick brief on what that happens, EPRA, in terms of to meet the demands when they are coming up with a tariff of all the generation that needs to be to provide power to Kenyans, of all the transmission lines that need to be used to supply that power, of all the distribution lines that need to be in place to supply all the Kenyans. EPRA would look at all the components, including the levies that maintain the water towers and all. After they have looked at all that, they will then estimate the number of units that will be sold in a particular year. I think the estimation of this year is upwards of 10,000, maybe about 10,585 or thereabouts gigawatt hours. So they will then see that this 10,585 or so gigawatt hours has to meet the demands of all generation. And when we talk about generation here, we are talking about all those that are supplied by KenGen and the IPPs. They will look at all that is required to maintain possibly the over 7,000 or 8,000 kilometers of transmission lines. Then they will look at all that is required to support the over 200,000 kilometers of LV network. Once they have picked all that, and it has an array of all players, they will then now come with a tariff of this is what we are going to sell per unit. This is all coming from IPRA, not Kenya Power. This is all coming from IPRA. After they have, that is now when they come up with a tariff. And the tariff that we are currently using is the one that was approved in April, which we call a cost reflective tariff. So that tariff comes by considering all those, which also does have a component on steam generation and exploration. So really, the tariff,
tariff
that
is like a baseline.
Yes.
When they say tariff, they say that's a baseline. And then does Kenya Power then apply that tariff? Like, for example, the way banks would say the base lending rate, the CBK base lending rate is X. Now we are giving you a loan at 2% above the base rate, and so on and so forth. How much above that tariff are you charging us for power?
No, there's nothing we charge above. We just religiously apply.
So you take it as it is prescribed,
Exactly.
and then when I'm buying for 100 shillings,
Yes.
you're applying that tariff to the 100 shillings,
Absolutely.
or rather to the amount of money that I have at the time to pay. So you're saying essentially you have, as Kenya Power, have no bearing whatsoever on the cost of the electricity we pay for on a regular. You're just taking it and saying, here it is, pay for it so we can give you power.
Absolutely. We just apply it. But possibly just to add in another just factor now that could vary from month to month. When that tariff was arrived at, and let me also state here that all the power we buy from generators is the cost is in dollars. All of them, including KenGen. So all the generation plants, once they have supplied what they have supplied this month, there is a tariff that, it has to be paid in dollars. Now, what then happens if the dollar exchange rate varies? What it would mean is that if the exchange rate when the tariff was applied, which is the base now, if that is the only variable, there are two variables mainly. That is the fuel used and the issue of the forex. The issue of the forex would mean if the exchange rate at that time was 130 shillings to the dollar, but right now we are at 145. Then the difference, that would then mean that for the same units that we were buying from even KenGen, we will have to pay with that escalation in forex.
Okay.
Because
So then how does Kenya Power make money? What if we were saying that you just apply a tariff, then how is it that Kenya Power is able to say we made this amount this year?
From that tariff that is regulated, which was approved by EPRA, I did indicate that there is the portion that goes to generation. There is the portion that goes to transmission. And in the transmission arena, we have mainly Ketraco and Kenya Power in that space. Then there is the one that goes to the LV network. What comes eventually to Kenya Power? If you are to look at 100% of what is paid, 65% goes to address generation. So for every 100 shillings that you pay for your electricity bill, 65% of it goes to generation. Then 16% comes to Kenya Power. It is that 16% now where our profit comes from.
So that's your margin.
It's not really the margin.
That's how much comes to you. Then from there now you determine.
Yes, from this 16% that we get, this is now what we use to do all the meter readings. This is what we use to replace the rotten poles. This is what we use to bill all the 9.2 million customers.
So this is why you use your operations.
Yes.
And you've got to manage your operations so that this 16% still gives you a profit.
Exactly. We have to optimize. And again, if Muga here does not pay his bill, I shoulder it directly. Yeah, because you see, the generation.
Muga
doesn't pay.
No. I know he does pay. Yeah, but the whole issue is that the entire risk. You see, if you look at all the players, Ndu and Latif and Muga, all of them will just sit back to wait to be paid.
They're waiting for money to come.
They will wait
Kenya
to be
Power.
paid for all the generation they sold to us. They will wait to be paid. The transmitters will wait to be paid for their network. Now, Kenya Power has to shoulder all the others. Dealing with the 9.2 million customers, dealing with the almost 270,000 kilometers of LV, dealing with the vandalism of transformers, where last year they were almost stealing one per day, dealing with, vandalism of all sorts, dealing with some guys at times who do some illegal things. All of it is shouldered by Kenya Power.
With this 16%.
With the 16%.
Before we go to the break, why are we buying all the power in dollars?
The reason is simple. If you look at all these plants, Latif, they were funded. And the funding, most of it, this is using materials that are mainly imported. So they may have gotten a fund, be it from the banks, if it's Kenyan, for example, be it from World Bank or FDB or all these financials or AFD, the bank loan would be in dollars. And they do meet their obligations by paying dollars to these financials. So, and that is actually why even in the repayment, it was pegged to the dollar. There is none really. If it was such that possibly now that we're having this conversation, if Kenyans can use their pension funds and use this other funding, which is local, then we may be looking forward to a situation where this sum of the generations is going to be Kenya shillings based. But as it is right now, all of them are dollar based by virtue of the obligations that they have to meet.
These investors in the generation space are not the only ones who import things. All right? When we are buying things in many of our shops, many of the components there have been imported. But they are not all manufacturers in the country are basing their price on the dollar. I mean, this particular conversation, I don't get it. But let's take a break first. It's 24 minutes to 10. Engineer Dr. Joseph Siror is the CEO and MD of Kenya Power. I think let's open up the lines for those 20 minutes after this break so you can engage him. Ask him the questions. Where are your pain points? Let him respond.
Spice
is the time for you to call in and engage. City, you have a question before we pick
Well,
the
actually,
callers.
let me perhaps read the question that has been asked.
All righty.
Why are all costs automatically transferred to the consumer? That's what this consumer thinks. That's question one. They also say, why can't users who generate their own power not be allowed to sell excess power to the grid in an easy and transparent way? Why didn't he just say in installments? I mean,
So the first question
the
was...
first question is, why are all costs automatically transferred to the consumer?
The whole issue, Muga, and in fact the listeners, is that these are businesses who generate this power. And when they do that generation, they are not doing it for themselves. They are doing it to meet your demand as a customer. And it would only make sense for you to pay for the service that you get. It will almost be like saying, if the price of fuel goes up globally, then why should you raise the price locally? I mean, it's really to compensate for the cost. Here, we are looking at the costs of that plant. If it was such that it was not passed, then you would actually be staring at that generator closing operations. Because you see, what is demand, or rather what is put on the tariff in as far as paying him is concerned, is to cater for his obligation
For costs.
to repay even the loans that he has taken. And if it was such that there was no mechanism to compensate him for that, like if the dollar rate goes up and for him to supply 1 unit, when the dollar was, say, 130 shillings, assume it's $0.50, you would need 65 shillings to get $0.50 in the market. Now, if the dollar goes up and you now have to pay 145, then to get $0.50, you need 75 shillings. Now, if that difference will not be catered for in terms of what the customer pays, then the question would be, who caters for it? It would definitely have required a subsidy from the government, and I think we're in a regime where really
Subsidies
subsidies, yeah.
Okay.
There's no cost.
I think the second question you already responded to that, and this is on net metering.
No, if by the way, they are allowed in terms of you generating and being able to supply to your neighbors. The regulator actually does allow that. So the only issue would just be to get a license, so that you don't again expose. When you're dealing with power, it's a very risky thing. I mean, it can cause injuries, it can kill, and the likes.
How easy is it to get a license?
I don't think it is that difficult. But possibly the regulator would be there.
With the right person.
Just to ensure that I think maybe the ease there would just be if you are willing to meet the standards and to provide it in the manner that is required, that definitely would not be very difficult.
It's as easy as you comply.
Exactly.
Okay, let's go to the phone line. Several callers on the line, so we'll take the first four and then you'll respond to those first. James from Nakuru, good morning.
Good morning, Siti Muga and Do.
Good morning.
Siti Muga and Do are fine.
Oh, and sorry, and Eric. My quick question to Dr. Siror.
Yes.
I can say he is moving away that they do not, the regulator is IPRA. But now to the transmission, which purely Kenya Power.
Not purely.
Exactly not.
No transmission. They do the transmission. Now it's not even IPRA that will do that transmission. And I don't know how Siror is trying to address the cost of transmission, because the cost of transmission is sometimes quite powerful, quite expensive actually.
Which transmission are you talking about, James? There's last mile distribution, and then there's a high voltage transmission by Ketraco.
No. Just yesterday, transmission ya kutoka kwa barabara kwa ploti. It's not even last mile.
Kwa kikingi, kwa transformer, kuleta kwa nyumba.
Kuleta kwa nyumba. Just 2 poles. In fact, just yesterday they gave me a quotation of about 195,000. Paka nikashindwa.
The question is, how do they calculate these things?
How do they calculate? And even the market price, because ukiangalia even their poles, and uangalia the poles on the market supplies up low. And then,
thank you, James. I've got to take other callers. Thank you. You've got the question. Clinton in Nairobi, good morning.
Good morning, Eric, Siti Ndu, and Dr. Engineer Siror.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, I have 4 questions, and I hope you find some time to answer them.
Ask one.
Okay, the first one. Let me ask two. What the engineer is doing to better the relationship between Kenya Power officials and the consumers? And number 2, I come from an area where we've been fed a narrative that the power we consume comes from Uganda. If we can debunk a little bit on that, that is Busia County, Samia sub-county specifically.
Okay. All right, he will respond to that. Paul in Roiro, good morning.
Morning, Eric, Siti, Endo, and Engineer. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Yeah, I must comment, Engineer. He has, in his short stint at Kenya Power, I think he has really tried to demystify the power sector in this country. I had one question for him. In one of the conversations he has been having in media houses, there's one I listened to him when he mentioned that a certain period, a certain time of the day, the power consumption is low. That's during the night, midnight there. And there's a way as consumers we can take advantage of that. There's an off-peak tariff. If I'm a manufacturer or I'm a domestic user, I consume power at that time, I'll be able to enjoy a low tariff. I don't know if we can demystify on that. Is it that one token that when I consume in the day, that one means when I consume in the day it will last shorter, and when I consume at that time of the evening it will last longer? Because I'm looking at a situation where I can
Piga pasi midnight. We get your question. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Kerry in Kileleshwa.
Thank you. Morning crew at the hot seat. Mine is a question to the Daktari has done very well, but now he's tied our hands on asking him about the cost of power, because he says he's the guy at the pump, so we can't really ask him on that. But why is it that we every time the criminals steal whatever they steal from the transformer, the residents around that transformer have to pay a heavy price because they stay several days without power. And when you call their customer service, they say you are being punished for allowing people to steal whatever they steal from the transformer. So you wonder, are we supposed as consumers to stay out at night looking after our transformers? Thank you very much for the interview. And I invite him again.
Thank you, Kerry. Final one, then you answer this one. Simon in Kitangala, how are you?
Yeah. Good morning, Eric.
Morning.
Mine, actually, I wanted the engineer to tell us their input to the ministry regarding, for instance, when we are talking about the national grid, sometimes most of us would think every homestead should be encouraged to have solar, so that the solar power, such that the national grid is at peace, so that the energy that is not being consumed there is directed to the maybe manufacturers and so on. What is their input? Why would they not also venture along those lines for the homestead not to rely mainly from the generation from the Kenya power and so on, so that we, the low consumers, can rely on solar power than the main power.
We get the question. Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Engineer, respond to these ones. Which one do you want to start with?
I think the first one was about the cost of connection.
Yep.
Yeah, there are a number of factors. Like if it's just a drop cable, the amount of materials that goes in to provide that service would be quite cheap. I think we do have a rate of about 35,000 shillings. That if it's just a drop cable.
And I do not understand why.
No, there are a number of factors.
I did an application just last month. I'm giving you now. This is past.
Okay.
5 meters. I counted. Kikingi ndio hii in a drop kwa hii less than 5 meters. Bill quoted 35,000 shillings.
Yeah, it's 35. It's the one I'm saying. If it's a drop cable.
Hey.
If it's a drop cable, yes, it's 35 shillings.
You're not buying a new Kikingi. It is there. It is only.
It's the materials that go into the provision of that service. Of course, there are cables. There are, I think there are a number of components that actually goes into that particular aspect. We could provide that information in terms of the detailing, but I think the most expensive item would just be the cable itself. And if you look at even the steel prices globally, Latif, the prices have really gone up. In fact, when we look at the quotes we had given last year, vis-a-vis now when we want to supply, we noticed that there is a 70% rise in terms of the cost. The costs have really gone up. The cost for transformers, yes.
70%?
Yes, it has gone up by 70%.
Cost of steel.
The cost of steel globally has really gone up. And this is what is messing and what is really contributing to the very high cost of connection. Yeah.
So in some cases, when I think the same question of connectivity, they're also talking about, you're looking at the various components that will come in. Am I paying for a transformer?
No, you are not paying for a transformer. But there are certain instances, Latif, where the transformer that is nearest to you is already overloaded. So that would mean then to supply this other customer, in as much as there is a very close by transformer, possibly a new transformer would be required to meet that extra load. So those are unique situations. And indeed, some customers do, or rather, find it difficult to understand. Because they'll tell you, no, there's a transformer that's just 200 meters away. But little do they know that transformer could be overloaded. And thus, one may need an additional one to actually meet the demand for that.
Who will pay for that cost of this new transformer?
I think it depends with them. At times, it is the customer. Depending on the kind of connection, at times it's the customer. Because you'll see, like I mentioned before, Latif and the others, if you look at what we are provided for in the tariff, that's 16%. Really, it does not provide so much leeway in terms of the capital. For the capital.
How can we change this 16%?
The way we can change it would be one, if we can spur the demand to go up. And I do appreciate that somebody even talked about the time of use tariff. Because if you see, and if the regulator, for example, is coming up with a tariff based on selling 10,000 gigawatt hours per year, which is now to respond to all the needs of generation, transmission, distribution, retail, and all. And if the network is such that, and indeed the generation can support it, possibly 15,000 gigawatt hours, then to that extent, you would have a situation where the tariff could go lower. And maybe just even for the sake of the public. It would be, you may find it very strange, Latif, to know that 8,700 customers account for 50% of our revenue.
8,500 customers.
8,700.
So that is essentially industry.
So where is
That
the other
is the
50%?
industry. And if you look at the majority of our customers, and these are now some of the aspects that consumers need to know, there is really a lot of cushioning for what is called the lifeline customers. We are talking about your customers who consume between 0 and 30 units. And if you are dealing with that person in the village who is now connected, and really we want to appreciate so much what the government has done in terms of this electrification, and possibly also to give a good setting in terms of why this high cost. When the government decided to ambitiously expand the network from the 2 million customers that we had 10 years ago to 9.2 million, there was massive investment. Massive investment in terms of bringing new generations. You're talking about the geothermal. Where geothermal was a few years ago is not where we are today. And in this journey of even going clean, and I do again want to appreciate the government here, there are other sources which could have been cheaper, but not possibly harnessing Mui Basin, I mean the coal there, would have really assisted in bringing the cost of power down. But when the government chose to go the clean way, to do geothermal prospecting per megawatt is $3 million. So there is heavy investment that goes into providing that power. So that we should not hang also the regulator now that I've directed where actually the blame should go. But if you look at the investment that has gone into the energy sector for the last 10 years, it is quite massive. And when we now look at the tariff, it's actually responding to that investment. It's responding to the investment.
Recouping that investment.
It's recouping that investment in generation, recouping that investment in transmission, and recouping that investment in the distribution. But the beauty, and this is what the public also ought to know, that when you look at this investment, and that's why even I was talking about driving the demand higher, the investment that has already been invested is going to last us many years to come. Like the line to Ethiopia, yes, it costed us about 50 billion shillings, but it is able to move power to the quantum of 2,000 megawatts. So that is to say then, even as we continue increasing the amount of power we require, and I do know the dams in Ethiopia are going to fill soon, we would then have a situation where we can get so much power without any additional investment. With the same investment, if you can drive the consumption higher so that the number of units sold are higher, then of course the cost per unit is going to come lower. So there are definitely a number of dynamics. And indeed, I did mention before that when you look at the current plants of geothermal which are coming on board, they are also cheaper. The beautiful thing about technology is that as you move along, it becomes cheaper, more efficient. So the geothermal plants that are now coming on board are coming at a much lower price than they have been before.
Respond then to this question, time of use tariff. Somebody was asking, can you encourage us to start ironing at night, at midnight? So
exactly. Yeah. There are a number of initiatives to drive this demand. One of them is what is called the time of use tariff. And maybe again, for the sake of the public, like I said, the 0 to 30, maybe let me just mention that briefly. If you have, say, 4 bulbs, each 5 watts, and that will be 20 watts, and you turn it on for 5 hours in a day, that would just mean about 100 watts. So the cost of 100 watts is just about 1 shilling and 20 cents. So for this person who has only 4 bulbs and is turning it from 7 o'clock to around midnight, his monthly bill is going to be 1 shilling and 20 cents times 30 days, which is just about under 50 shillings. So really, power is not expensive. It is the usage. What are you using it for? Of course, 0 to 30 units is the lowest tariff at 12 shillings and 24 cents per unit. That is if you average consumption. You are talking about average consumption. Between 30 and 100, if your average consumption is between 30 and 100, you will pay 16 shillings and 50 cents per unit. And if it's over 100, then you go to 20 shillings. And of course, there are taxes and levies and all. So when you look at the cost outlay for really the majority who are in the lifeline, over 7 million customers, they are on the lowest tariff, where they are able to function and to really gain a lot of benefits by using power, avoiding the smoke, avoiding health assets. Now, on the time of use tariff, this was mainly targeting now the high consumers, mainly the commercial and the industry. And we do have a tariff because if you look at our pattern, like I said, it may be around 1,200 megawatts early in the morning. It may go to around 15, 16 midday, go to about again, oscillate around 1600 to around 6 p.m. Then it starts now going up. It goes up all the way to 2100. And indeed, again, just for the sake of the public, for clarity, what does happen is that even in the dispatch of power, we first of all have to start with what's called take or pay. Take or pay means you pay whether you take it or not. Once we've brought all of them in, it is still not, and it is far from satisfying the demand. So we then have to bring in the cheapest sources using a merit order. So we'll bring in the hydros, bring in geothermals. Once you've met all those requirements, for as long as you are oscillating at around 1200 and the likes, most of those would be able to meet, except now for the grid constraints, which may not enable you to pass power for places or voltage mechanism or stabilization for places like Mombasa and all that. So you may still have some thermals which have other purposes. But the moment you start reaching 6 p.m. at Latif, the demand, after you've run all the sources, all the cheap sources, but you are unable now to meet demand. So you then have to engage in the thermals to address that shortfall. Otherwise, you'd actually be faced with the challenge of rotating. Now, the time of use tariff then kicks in to even out that curve, because from around 10 p.m. it drops back. It drops back from that almost 2,100. It drops back to about 1,200. By midnight, again, you may be oscillating at around 1,000. So this one is really to drive the demand so that if you are able, if the industry is able to take advantage of it, they actually get it at half the tariff. So that instead of paying the normal tariff, they'll actually be paying 50%.
So operate at night and you'll pay cheaper power.
Not necessarily. You must still meet your demand for the day. So that it avoids a situation where you now start migrating. Instead of you operating during the day, you operate at night. We still want you to operate during the day, but now at night, if you want to add one more shift to take advantage of the lower tariff, then we encourage you to do so, because you will then get the power at
Two questions to go, quickly. Are we getting power from Uganda?
Yes, we are interconnected. We have a power exchange from Uganda, the Ginger line, the UAB line. And it varies with the time of the day and the time situations.
Okay.
For most of the time, we get even up to 50 megawatts from them. But whenever they have a challenge, also they get power from our side. So it's a two-way. It's not only in one direction like Ethiopia,
so
where power moves in one direction.
Yeah. The other one, why does it take so long to make repairs, and why does it appear like you're punishing consumers for a transformer stolen in their neighborhood?
No, it's not really punishing. I know I may have mentioned it the last time, Latif, that there was a situation in Kenya Power where for 1 year, they were unable to buy critical materials. It's now really that we are now buying the transformers and all that. So it created a serious backlog where there were so many transformers required, there were so many meters required, and they were unavailable.
So the issue is it's taking long to replace the transformer because
it was unavailable.
There's a shortage.
Exactly.
All right.
There was a shortage.
Questions answered. Engineer, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Engineer Dr. Joseph Siror is the Managing Director and CEO of Kenya Power. He's been our guest for the last 2 hours. And yeah, you need to come again, right? It's important for us to have this conversation so we can all start getting to understand, all right, so what's happening, what's the thinking. We can even ask you tougher questions from a point of knowledge.
Okay.
Asante sana.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to Kenya's biggest conversation today. Join us again tomorrow, Thursday, the 26th of October, 2023. Have a lovely day. It's 10 a.m.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.